We are now pseudo live and going true live in 5, 4, 3. Hello, wonderful and amazing people. Today's Topic Tuesday is just on vampires. No political agenda, no trying to trans the genders, no trying to infiltrate the conservative party. Just vampires. And my guest today is the amazing Des M. Astor, author of incredible vampire fiction, both erotic and non. Hello, Des. I am wonderful. So, Des, I'd like to start out with a couple of starting questions. First off, how did you get into vampires? Ah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um. I'm sorry, there's an issue on my side.
No
Would you
worries.
mind talking again?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly. Okay. So I'm gonna. You can hate me for this. Can you repeat what you said? I don't think
Yeah, no
my
worries. It's
OBS
okay.
actually caught it.
No worries. It's okay. So pretty much, I was into this book called Vampire Kisses, which
Mm-hmm.
I reread as an adult, and it does not hold up like at all. Like it works for teenagers, doesn't work for me. Um, but that's what got me into it in middle school, and then I won a free book manga Vampire Night, and that was when I realized, oh, I'm really into vampires. So
I
I just
remember
started
Vampire
reading.
Night.
Yeah, it has an ending that I hate.
Yeah,
I'm so like angry about it. I might just out of spite write a fan fiction, re fan fiction the ending if I
I
have the time.
say, I say go for it. I am a huge supporter of fanfiction.
Yeah, yeah, that's what got me into writing actually. Yeah.
Nice. I'm working on some pseudo fantasy stuff right now, and I
Hmm.
hope if I ever get it published that I get a lot of really crazy fanfic. I would love that.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. It's fun to read.
so another question. The vampires in the novel of yours that I wrote, they work very differently from a lot of the more modern depictions of vampires.
Hmm.
Um, I think the way you put it on the cover of Dancing Crow, or maybe it was in the description, but
Hmm.
you make vampires bite again.
Yes, yeah.
Um,
It's my favorite phrase.
so why do you make vampires the way you make them in your settings?
Well, I like straying away from traditional stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, just something that I like doing. It's very strange because I actually don't prefer traditional vampire lore at all with the
Mm-hmm.
whole religious the ties. I just don't like that.
Right.
So I'm just making my own. So I made them into a living predatory humanoid species, very different from the undead that we see, but they're fully alive.
Mm-hmm.
I like evolution and science, so I blended that so much into my vampires. So I made them a sister species of humans, and basically, for the bite thing, so usually predatory species don't have teeth that, like, vampires wouldn't have any human teeth. They're only blood drinkers.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that into mine with dentition, and they have chompers that are all blade teeth. It's very scary when they smile. You can see their blades of their teeth. They don't just have two fangs, so there's that. I blended in serpent biology, and added in venoms, different venom types for paralyzing and pain, different saliva types, anticoagulants and coagulants for the feeding process. Very mindful of biology in general. And of course, I took a bunch from vampire bats. Vampire bats are able to be sanguinivores because of the bacteria in their gut. So
Mm-hmm.
I use that for my vampires. And I just decided, I'm like, well, when a human turns, even though vampires can be born, but they can also turn people, They're not undead either. Their DNA gets corrupted. Like they turn into a completely different species.
Yeah,
Something you only see in single-celled organisms, but this is fantasy, so I can do whatever
right.
I want. Yeah.
That's actually super awesome. I love that. Um, have you ever happened to have read the Dresden Files?
I think I started it, but I have to
Okay.
continue it. I've read
It is
very little of it.
my guilty pleasure series because the main
Mhm.
character is very sexist. He is a womanizer through and through. But I like
Mhm.
the fact that every time he is sexist and a womanizer, he ends up like basically you can tell at the start of the novel how messed up he's gonna be
Mhm.
by how misogynistic he is. It's like, oh crap, he did this and this. Yeah, no, he's about to get fucked up.
That's good.
And I love that instant karma that he gets throughout the series.
Gotta love instant karma. I absolutely love that.
Oh, Michael is saying that I am having an echo. That is. There, Michael, does that fix it? I'm not sure where the second echo came in at, but. Um. So, what I like about the Dresden Files, and what I use in my personal fantasy setting, is that vampire isn't a distinct, set in stone thing.
Mhm.
Instead, it's a descriptor for an overall type of thing. So in Dresden
Yeah.
Files, a vampire is just a supernatural creature who exists by pretending and living amongst human society while feeding on humans.
Mhm.
So they're actually the three most different powerful types of vampires. Is you have the red vampires or the red court, which they're basically monsters. They take on a human skin and they can shed that skin whenever they feed. And they eat human like meat, blood, and all. And they have a type of saliva that is a basically it's a drug. If they were to kiss you, you would come away as if you had just taken a huge dose of opioids.
Mhm.
Um and they use that to like get people in their service, get them addicted to them, stuff like that. And they will eat people and then reassume their human form. And then there's the White Court, which they basically have a demonic soul inside of them that exists within them. It's not they are demonic, it's that it's two souls in one body.
Mhm.
And it's basically a host. It's a symbiotic relationship, basically. And they get all these supernatural things, but in exchange, they have to feed on the life force of human beings, and they do this through like seduction and whatnot. They're the sexual, sensual vampires, and they're all super hot and sexy. But then you have the actual undead vampire, which are Black Court. Which, what I love about Black Court vampires is they can't turn anyone into Black Court vampires, really. Instead, the way Black Court vampires are made is it's basically wizards who have practiced necromancy and dark arts, and they found a way to take their soul out of their body and put it into another body. So they'll take someone else's body, put their soul in, and then they'll inhabit that body until it starts to rot, and then they'll just switch to a new body. And so instead of them feeding, it's like that,
Okay. That's interesting.
right? And what do you think about like Dresden Files, Elder Scrolls, like all these other different settings where it's like vampires basically have clans and every clan kind of has its own little like power and power structure and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that reminds me of Vampire the Masquerade. I like that stuff. I actually wish that I had done more variety with my vampires, but yeah, I like that sort of different dynamic a lot. I think it's a lot of fun to play with. And plus, vampires exist like all over the world.
They
It's a
do.
myth, so you could like make different species out of that.
Talking about vampire myths, which vampire myth do you think is de facto the craziest in your opinion that you know of?
Um, there's the floating. Okay, well, two answers. The craziest one would definitely be the floating head that the intestines, follow along. I have to look up specifically where that's from. Um, but my favorite one is from African mythology. I'd have to look up
Mm-hmm.
which country. So there are these thunderbirds that I have it on my vampire article. Actually, I'll just bring that up and look it up. But I'll explain it while I'm doing that.
Mm-hmm.
thunderbirds, which you'd think would have no connection to vampires, but they're vampiric birds. And I just love that. I'm just like, wait, what? They can have human forms and be like a seductive young man or something. And I'm like, that's the most, I've never expected to like hear that with vampires, you know?
Right,
So
that is pretty unique.
I absolutely love it. I think here, let me see. I think in Iceland, there it is. And I'm sorry for butchering pronunciation. I actually can barely speak English, even though it's my first name and I can't do pronunciation. So apologies if I get this wrong. In Pundalu, folklore of many South African tribes, there are often a witch familiar said to be a black and white bird the size of a person that could summon thunder and lightning with its wings and talons. Sometimes they take on the form of a beautiful young man to seduce women. And they're vampiric. They drink blood. So like you get through all of that, and they're like, oh, okay, so they're vampires. I'm like, yep, love it.
That's
It's
really
my favorite
cool.
one. I love it so much.
I know that there are some vampire myths where like vampires are incredibly OCD,
Mm-hmm.
and like if you scatter some rice on the ground or if you tie a whole bunch of knots into a net or something like that, they are compelled and they like can't not do it because it becomes so irritating to them. They have to stop and count the rice, or they have to stop and untie every knot. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think some of those are just really, really weird.
Yeah,
Yeah, Aurora just said they have to stop and count every grain of rice. It's awesome. Yeah.
that's one way to
Um,
stop them.
right? I love it.
Even in the traditional space, there's like weird stuff. Like you can't cross running water. You have to
Mhm.
be invited into the house. You have to carry your dirt from your homeland. Like I'm like, okay.
Which I do love that. It doesn't really make any sense in like the grand scheme of science and everything, and I love that.
It's fair.
Um so what is the scariest type of vampire you've ever, heard of?
That's a good question because I am one of those people who's weird and doesn't like ugly vampires, so I don't actually look into them very much
Mhm.
because to me they might as well just be zombies if they're that way. But
Right.
I have to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I made the I made the scariest vampires I possibly could in mine. So aside from the
Nice.
fact that they don't look horrifying, they just look like
Right.
regular people. But
Um
bat monster vampires are cool. I would say those ones work for this.
which kind?
Bat monsters, those that have like a bat monster form, they turn into this
Oh
gigantic
yeah.
bat and can rip you to shreds that way. That's pretty cool.
I like that. For me, the scariest kind is either Chiropterans from the Blood Plus series.
Mm.
Um, because they can only be killed with the blood of a vampire queen. So basically, if you're a human and you're not part of this vampiric war, you're fucked. There ain't shit you can do.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Um, but there is also this novel that I read as a kid, and I can't for the life of me. Michael says in the chat, obviously the scariest kind is from Twilight. I do
Oh yeah,
agree, they are
I
terrifying because they don't seem like real vampires.
yeah I could go on a whole rant on that, and if we bring that up, I'm going to just because
Nice.
as a vampire author, I'm gonna go rip into it.
That's okay. But I read this book as a kid, and it really freaked me out because the way these vampires were depicted, and this book was far above my like age level. Um, Basically, vampires, they didn't have a lot of the weaknesses that people thought. They were perfectly okay with crossing running water. It's just that because of the differences in the way their body operated now, it was a lot more difficult for them to swim.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so putting them in water did give them a disadvantage, but it didn't kill them. And in addition to that, basically each time a vampire was turned, they would gain some traits from the original vampire that turned them. And in addition to that, it was kind of like a memory trade thing. So,
Mm.
like, if you were a vampire and you were turning me, you would gain some of my memories, I would gain some of yours. And so an older vampire that had turned a lot of people, they're going to have an entirely different personality, set of memories. They're going to be a little insane.
Yeah, I
Um,
can imagine that.
and in addition to that, the vampires did kind of have powers to them. For one, during daylight, they were only as strong and whatnot as humans, but like it was the upper tier of humans, like bodybuilders and stuff like that. But then
Hmm.
during nighttime is whenever they're at their peak strength, and that's whenever they could like leap multiple stories and bend metal and all this other shit. So being in daylight didn't do shit to them, and yeah. But they did have powers, and the powers would kind of mutate with each person turn. So like if you had like telekinesis and turn someone else, maybe that person has a different type of telekinesis or it'd have telepathy and it would just mutate as people pass it down.
I love
But
that.
right? But the only way to kill one was to behead one because they didn't have a heart. Most of their internal organs were just shriveled, and it was common for vampires after they hit a certain age to literally cut themselves open and remove the organs that are wasting space. That way they can take in more blood,
Oh, that's interesting.
right? And on top of that, um, pain to them, like their pain and pleasure centers, were completely mixed. So if you caused them any pleasure, they would feel it as both pleasure and pain, and vice versa. So fighting one, like they love to fight, they're like, fuck yeah, cut me up.
That's great. I love that.
But yeah, that was the only way to kill them was to behead them, and like the whole I think it was part of a series, but like I remember it was set up because it was like kind of an apocalypse thing of like the small group of vampires just kind of going on a crusade and like tearing down country by country, and it was
Hmm.
set in like the 1400s.
Oh, that makes
And
sense.
yeah, it
Yeah,
was really cool. I don't know.
cool.
Aurora asks, who was it by? Was it by Anne Rice? And I don't know who it was by. I was way too young to have been reading this book. um,
We all delved into that stuff
right.
when we were younger. Come on, if we're here
Um,
watching this stuff.
right? But yeah, that was the scariest vampire to me because even though you would think that the series relied on just the overwhelming power of this creature, instead it relied a lot more on the fact that these vampires, they were fine to take all the time in the world because they're like, we have an eternity. If we can't
Hmm.
beat you, we'll just wait out until you die of old age and then we'll just fight your kids instead. Because they'll be
That's
weaker
true.
than you, they'll have less experience, they won't.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that was
That makes
terrifying.
sense. It does sound terrifying. I agree.
Okay, so
Let's
let's
see.
talk about Twilight. Let's do
Oh God.
it.
No, I swear to God, as a vampire author, because Twilight is a bloody plague. Because of course everyone's gonna ask me, "Oh, so you write Twilight?" And I want to rip them up to shreds at that point. And I'm like, the ironic thing is, my derpy ass character Ares, who's my
Hmm.
one of my favorite vampires, learning about Twilight, he would put glitter on himself and just rock around laughing his ass off. Bosses
Hmm.
like that.
Um, yeah, that sounds kind of funny. I do like the kind of thing about like other vampire, like Twilight existing in a world with vampires, and those vampires proceeding to mock the ever living shit out of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, since mine's urban fantasy and it takes place in our world, like it takes
Right.
place in 2020, the apocalypse hits then as a vampire apocalypse. So it exists
Yeah.
and it's made fun of.
Nice. Have you ever watched What We Do in the Shadows?
No, but I want to.
It's one of my favorite series ever.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna have to watch that.
one of my headcanons with What We Do in the Shadow, because they make references sometime to Twilight and how ridiculous it is. One of my headcanons is that one of the smart vampires actually goes out of their way to make Twilight, that way people will like underestimate vampires.
Oh, that's great. And the thing is, like, I am all for, obviously twisting lore, like I do with my stuff, and
Hmm.
all lore and taking into consideration is valid. But at that point, the vampires in that story is A are gargoyles because they're made of stone. I read
Hmm.
the books, I should know, and they sparkle like diamonds in this. It just, it makes people take vampires far less seriously, and I'm like, this is stupid.
It does.
I can't handle it because and they don't have fangs either. Apparently their teeth are like razor sharp, but you look in the movie and they're not. Okay.
By the way, Aurora says that your vampire cosplay is amazing.
Oh, thank you so much.
And
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't have
really,
the blade teeth, but
yeah.
to figure out how to work those.
Thing is, I don't even really see this as cosplay for you. This is just how you look.
Yeah,
And I love it.
thanks so
Um,
much.
but yeah, I really dislike Twilight just for one, the implications of everything that Edward does.
Yeah, aside the vampire lore aside, their relationships are so toxic.
They really
The
are.
fucking thing.
But then in addition to that, it's like y'all are sitting here saying that you're living in fear from humans for however long. It's like even modern day humans only might be able to really do any harm to you. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, they're not apparently not very easily killed. I think that it's and then there's one other thing that I have to mention with their bullshittery. But they're not very easily killed, so why they're hiding like that? And the fact that they can sustain an animal blood is also stupid. I hate it when people pull
Right?
that. And then I always hate in every vampire myth, if people do this, I will nail you for it. It is the dumbest thing, one of the dumbest things, aside from anything that's religious. If your bite turns every single time you feed, that is stupid lore, and no one
Mm-hmm.
can convince me otherwise. Because if you bite and turn someone every single time you feed, you're gonna run out of food. It just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make any sense to me. So I always have a gripe against that particular lore. And that Twilight does that, and I'm like, okay, so
Right?
you're never gonna be able to eat. You have to kill every single time. The
I
purpose
hate
of a
it.
parasite is to usually not kill your host right away.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Um, in my fantasy setting, I do have multiple different types of vampires,
mm-hmm.
and there are two separate types that are able to turn people into vampires via biting. For one of
Yeah,
them, it's a type of disease,
that
and
makes
for the
sense.
other one, it's a type of magical thing.
Yeah.
So for the one type where it's a disease, basically whenever they feed from someone, then that person, so there's a kind of toxin in their venom and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot that makes the person really sick.
Oh,
It's not supposed to kill them most of the time, but occasionally someone will die from it.
that makes
And
sense.
what it
See, that
does,
makes sense.
right, and what it does is it makes them really sick, and it basically puts them into a delirious state. And then after a few days, once they're able to break out of the sickness and the fever and everything and come back to, they'll just view being fed on and stuff like that as just part of the delirium. And by
Oh, that's
then,
actually really clever.
right? And by then the
Yeah.
bite wound would have healed up because that's another
Mm-hmm.
part of the venom is that it actually does have a bit of a healing factor to it. So it's how they stay hidden.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
very, very rarely, someone who dies after being fed on will come back. It's very
Yeah, that's
rare.
fair. Yeah, it
But,
makes more sense if it's fair, because like, and if they do die after feeding. But my problem is if you're turning and they turn into a vampire every single time, you're gonna be
hmm
overpopulated, and the entire world's
exactly.
gonna just end. And I'm like,
And it
I
puts
like the
you,
where you could choose it. Oh,
right,
sorry, go ahead.
you're good. And it puts you in kind of a dilemma because, like, if someone turns every time you feed, if you feed on someone, you now have this moral dilemma of do you kill them and kill a young vampire, a protege, basically a type of offspring for you, or do you let them go on and end up greatly diminishing the food supply and everything? Like, it's a lose lose situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
Like at
hate it,
least, yeah, I agree. Like at least have some sort of mechanism where you can decide whether you turn them,
right?
in my opinion.
Um,
Or do what you do and say, oh, it's actually quite rare, and that makes also sense.
right. The second kind of vampire that I have in my fantasy setting that is able to feed from others and turn them through that way. The
Mm-hmm.
way it actually works for them is it's kind of like a magical ritual
Oh, I
where
love that. Yeah.
because that's how these vampires got their abilities is they're less physical kind of vampires and they're much more like magical prowess and illusion and stuff.
Oh, I love
And
that type too. That's
I
cool.
noticed. And the way their turning works is basically they have to take a person, that person has
Mm-hmm.
to be willing, and then they have to drain all of that person's blood out of them
Mhm.
while also basically transfusing blood from themselves into this person.
Oh, yeah, that's a good turning method. I like that.
But there's still a chance that it's going to go wrong and the
Mhm.
person may not become a vampire. They may either die or they may become a ghoul where their body is fine, but their brain is completely broken and all they can think about is eating. And they will gorge themselves to the point where their stomach literally bursts open from blood and meat because of just how much they're overfeeding. And so
That
if that
makes sense.
happens, the vampires will hunt down this ghoul and kill it.
Mhm. That's
So,
cool. Yeah.
mhm.
That's a good turning method. I like that a lot. These
Same.
things that are vicious.
Uh,
Gorge.
what's the weirdest turning method you've seen?
Um, I've got to think about that one.
For me, I remember I forgot where I saw it, but there was a list I had of like super crazy old myths, and there was one about how a woman who didn't get her period, uh, but she wasn't pregnant or anything like that, how there was a chance she would turn into a vampire because her body had like absorbed the blood and she would become addicted to the blood and it was just
That's
insane.
so ridiculous. Oh my gosh.
Right? Like what the fuck?
Yeah, a lot of the vampire myths will target women around the world,
Mhm.
which is
Really
annoying.
weird.
Yeah.
It seems to either target women, the other, or rarely the higher ups, the people in power.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, people have mentioned because I did a deep dive article on my blog about vampires and what people, think. And
Hmm.
some folks did mention it does target the elite and representative of the elite, which makes sense. It makes
Right.
a lot of sense.
Talking about targeting the elite, women, and the other. Uh, how do you feel vampire media as it is presented in our modern culture? What niche do you think it fits in? Do you think it still targets, the other women, the higher ups, stuff like that? Or do you feel like it has a different kind of niche now than it did back in the day? Or I should say
Um,
niche, but southern accent. Anyway.
no worries. Um, I think that a lot of they've advanced to more of a there's like a subculture around vampires and horror and stuff, so they've definitely bled into horror media quite a bit. Horror media and urban fantasy are the two that they'll go to. So
Hmm.
as for who they represent, I think that that's pretty accurate, but more of the elite now.
Hmm.
Like definitely they represent more of the elite because you see a lot of royal. Like I do it in my story very much where you'll see them being like very rich, very royal, and abusing that power heavily.
Hmm.
Which yes, I have a metaphor in my story I didn't even intentionally do, and I did it. So yeah,
Nice.
basically that's what that is.
Um, if I can present a thought,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think perhaps one of the reasons that it's so much more common to see vampire media nowadays targeting the rich, capitalists, and whatnot is we're finally at a stage culturally where it is not only commonplace but openly accepted that we are allowed to criticize those above us. Whereas
Yeah,
throughout
that
most of
makes sense.
history, that really wasn't a thing you could openly do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of vampire media kind of plays into that.
Yeah, I would agree with that definitely.
Um, how do you think the way vampire media has been presented, how do you think that's kind of affected modern day culture, especially in fantasy settings?
Um, so a lot of people hate this about vampires, but they
Hmm.
have prettified, beautified monsters,
Yeah.
and they do miss the point of why that happens, though. And it makes for a perfect trapdoor spider, basically, where they will lure you in and rip you to shreds, essentially. So it brings in a different type of monster, especially in the horror genre and culture. But it also, the other part of it, outside of horror, if you look
Hmm.
into the whole sexualization and stuff, it allows people to embrace the darker sides of their sexuality or fetishes or whatever.
Right.
And that's another big part of vampires you see.
Hmm.
Um, So with culture, I think they've changed it in a way where this darker stuff that works in the mind can come out a bit more
Right.
and be expressed through vampires. So.
Right. Trigger warning for anyone watching. I am going to be bringing up the topic of various kind of extreme kinks, such as blood play and whatnot.
Mhm.
Um, so kind of going on that topic that you brought up about allowing or allowing people to better explore the darker sides of themselves. I've noticed that specifically within the BDSM community and kink community, there almost seems to be an unintentional aesthetic overlap between BDSM, kink, and whatnot, the way it's seen, depicted, the kind of like gear that we use, the kind of stuff that you see in dungeons and whatnot, and then the stuff that is displayed in various vampire movies. Like it's very gothic, a lot of black and cold iron, a lot of a lot of leather, candles and stuff like that. Um, do you think that there's kind of an unintentional thing where people will purposely put a lot of kink stuff into their vampire novels because they don't even realize that it's allowing them to tap into those darker sides of their nature?
Oh yeah, and some people like me do it intentionally. Ask anyone who raised vampire kink if they're into BDSM. You'll probably get an answer of yes the entire time.
Probably.
But yes, yeah, I would say even if it's unintentional, probably you do see that a lot with vampires, especially if you have romance involved at all.
Right. I've noticed that I forget which image it was, but it was while you were talking about some of your erotic vampire fiction on Twitter. You
Hmm.
posted an image of one of the characters being bitten with blood and everything
Oh
coming
yeah,
down.
a lot of people love that image.
I'm sure. I think part of it, for me at least, why vampires are so attached to kink and whatnot, is vampires basically have a healing factor. And
Hmm.
what a lot of people don't want to think about with kink is you actually do have to be very careful. Like
Yes.
with BDSM and stuff like that, you have to be careful where you whip, where you hit, how you do it, all this other stuff. Because, like, if you whip a certain area, you're going to be fucking up the kidneys. You're going to be bruising the lungs. You could mess up someone's jaw. Like, there's a whole bunch of risk to it. And with
Yeah.
vampires, you don't have to worry about that risk because they're going to be able to heal up. But then in addition to that, they get to explore some of the dark kinks, some of the what some people in the kink scene call the black kinks, or the kinks that you're not really supposed to be okay with in society. And that's
Hmm.
stuff like blood play and, a whole bunch of those even darker kinks.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
allows the exploration of those kinks openly, and you don't have to take on any moral guilt for any of your kinks because, oh, my partner's fine. They're a vampire. They'll heal.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. I've heard a lot about that. Given I won't dive too deeply into the. Anyway, you can
Hmm.
probably get a summary as to what I'm into based on what I've written, and that's all I'll say. Um, but yes,
Right.
it is a fantasy kink, and that's the thing. Like, you can't really do fantasy kinks in real life, and a lot of people with those kinks understand that. Anyone
Hmm.
with vor, that's one thing that you'll see. A lot of
Right.
people obviously know you can't get into that. And then again, blood play, anything like that.
Yeah.
Like with mine, for example, there's not really any like if I have a vampire human pairing and they
Hmm.
lose a lot of blood, I explain it away. I'm like, okay, well, actually, they have this magic that increases the blood production and all this. So I explain away why it's not an issue
Hmm.
and why
Nice.
people are able to get away with this, something that does not exist in real life. And it's a way to explore all of those without having to worry about it because you can't explore that in real life. Like you said, you have to be extremely careful with everything, and it's really good to be educated on all of
Hmm.
that too. And so if people have those kinks, they should definitely like do some research before diving into them. But fantasy and vampires are a great genre to explore it in a fantasy sense where there is no risk. So.
I agree. As someone who is in the kink scene, I am gonna take a quick detour to anyone watching this or listening to this once I put it up on YouTube. if you are into kink play, into BDSM, stuff like that, please do not just do some Google searches and assume that's the end of your research. Find
Mhm.
a kink group in your area or in a nearby area. Go up for a munch, talk to them, let them know that you're new, that you're interested in learning. There are people and they will bring you into like workshops, classes, stuff like that, and they will actively teach you how to do this stuff safely and enjoyably. Okay, and that's always the best route because if you're just going off what Randy Triple X 69 said on fucking Quora, then you might end up messing up, yourself or your partner or any number of other things. Okay.
Exactly.
Please be careful, please be safe.
Mhm. This
Um
applies to choking too, by the way.
yes, it
Very
does.
important.
Very important. Remember, you're not trying to crush their windpipe. You're not trying to actually
Exactly.
asphyxiate them. Um,
Mhm.
but
Very
anyway.
important stuff. I think we've pissed off many conservatives now. I think we've achieved our goal
Oh,
again.
fuck them. Uh, but
Oh my god.
so talking about fantasies and using vampires to fulfill those fantasies, uh, how do you view as vampires being a power fantasy, especially for cishet white dudes in modern culture? Because a lot of vampires are like these cishet white dudes that are like, "Oh yes, I am so above thee," and like they're in these positions of power, and they always end up with like this young, impressionable girl. And I've just noticed that like a lot of vampires, they seem like whenever they are humans, this dude was probably an incel.
That's true. I've noticed that. And maybe that's why there's like no vampires aside from mine that I like. I'm like, oh, don't like you. Nope, don't like you. You're boring. Hate you.
Right.
It's very weird. I've got this weird dynamic of like absolutely hating a lot in the vampire genre while also being a vampire writer. So I don't understand that, but it's a thing.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I definitely think there's kind of a power fantasy structure going on, and it
Hmm.
does, like, vampires both serve as a way to criticize the capitalist elite and whatnot, but at the same time, I feel like as time goes on and vampires and let me rephrase, as time goes on and we start to better humanize and empathize with monsters, especially in stuff like The Shape of Water and whatnot, I feel like vampires are steadily shifting from a criticism of bloodsuckers and them draining the lowly class and cattle into basically their power fantasy. There's something to live up to. It's a unlocking of even more power,
Hmm.
and then it's also asserting like this is yours. Don't be ashamed of it. Flaunt it, live with it. It's yours. No one gets to take it.
That's true. That could be a good criticism of the vampire genre for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hell yeah.
it's something to be careful of.
Cue communism music. Um uh but yeah, that's one of my personal things about it.
Hmm. That makes sense.
So I
Yeah.
see you have a couple World of Warcraft plushies behind you.
Oh yeah, I've got like a whole collection of them.
What do you think about
Oddly
the
behind this.
Oh, very nice. What do you think about the Sand
Oh
Lane?
God. Oh, the Sand Lane. Unfortunately, I have an obsession with them. So yeah, for like what 4 year plus years, I had a thread going, still have it going on the forums, even though I don't play the damn game.
Yeah,
To get playable Sand Lane, it's actually low hanging fruit. I love the lore so much. They're very awesome tacticians of the Scourge. They encompass a lot of what I like about vampires, and yeah, they had a chance to be added into the game in Battle for Azeroth, but weren't. So I'm still very
agreed.
uptight about that. Their
Same.
story could be a lot similar. Sorry, very similar to Death Knights, where they turned anti-heroes essentially. Like they, sorry, I mean, never mind.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, they start off as really bad, but then rejoin the forces of the living and fight for their people.
Nice.
I've roleplayed Sand Lane for so many years. I even have my own headcanon on my site and everything. So yeah, I know a lot about Sand Lane.
That's
A lot,
awesome.
probably more than most people, unfortunately.
That you're fine. Something I do wish they would add to WoW if they start making the game better, which it seems
Hmm.
like they are. WoW was
Right.
recently bought by Microsoft. They're finally letting the Horde and Alliance play together.
Thank gods. God, I'm
Right,
so happy about that
Jesus
decision. But
Christ.
it needs to extend to guilds. It
Same,
100% needs to extend to guilds.
100%. Not only
Like,
that,
screw the
but
patch more,
like,
I hate it.
right, but not only that, I want to be able to walk into fucking Stormwind as my fucking troll shaman and be able to set up shop and be like, "Hi, I'm your ally. I'm here to help you. Anyone need any healing?"
Yeah. That's
Um,
gonna offend so many of the flippin' faction elitists, but I don't care. I agree with you.
right. Fuck faction elitists. But I really wish they would add fucking blood magic because there's so
Yeah.
much lore for it, especially with the blood elves in the Sand Lane and death
I agree.
knights, but they never tackle it.
Yeah, that would be something great to tackle, and they just seem to never want to do that. It's like I could go on a rant all day about how much I hate Shadowlands and how they completely just skipped over Sand Lane and expanding blood magic, instead bringing these new vampires that I hate that I will not rant about for too long or at all, but I can't stand them.
Right.
And yeah, like I just hate how they bring in something just new and out of the blue and just ignore old lore and
Mm-hmm.
everything that I love. I'm just like, okay, cool.
Same. Not everything has to be, ooh, what a twist.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's so
It's
frustrating.
okay to take a domino that you set up in the past and finally let it fall over.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to take it and
Exactly.
put it back in the box.
Exactly.
Um,
But yes, I hope it's getting better. I certainly do. They are making better decisions now. I hope the company as a whole and the game gets better, even
agreed.
though I've moved on.
Um, so I kind of want to pull back around to Twilight because I know you hate the series.
Yeah.
Um, so question, who do you think would win? Vampire Lestat from Diary of a Vampire or
Mm-hmm.
Edward?
Lestat. I mean, I might
Original.
not be as like everyone's into Lestat, and I'm sitting here like, he doesn't do much for me, but I still think he'd win 100%.
Nice. I remember getting into a fight in high school because I described Edward as a pretty boy monster cosplaying as Lestat.
That's accurate. Love it.
But to be fair, Lestat was OG vampire pretty boy.
That's true. A lot of people cite and hate on Anne Rice for doing the original Pretty Vampires and put down anyone who likes Pretty Vampires, but then I bring up, they've existed far before that, and
Hmm.
everyone just snaps at me. They do say that Anne Rice brought it into mainstream, the Pretty Vampire, and I'll give them that. But at the same time, I'm like, they did exist before your ugly ass Nosferatu, so.
Right. um. So, what thing about Twilight do you most dislike? For me, it's the fact that each of these vampires or gargoyles, they seem to have like basically they don't feel like vampires to me. They feel like superheroes.
Yeah, I think that, like, his vampire lore that I have a gripe with aside, which actually, there could have been some good stuff done with that, honestly,
Hmm.
if it wasn't depicted the way it was, like sparkling in the sun. That's one of the major gripes I have. But if it was something a little bit different and their skin was stone, okay, fine, we could have gotten away with it. Some of the vampire powers are interesting. Alice is an interesting character. I like her a lot. Anything that
Hmm.
was interesting, like Rosalind, for example, her backstory, amazing. I like it. Was not explored. We focus on Bella and Edward and their terrible characters, but we don't focus on any of the interesting ones.
Hmm.
And we also glorify toxic relationships,
Yeah,
which is not good. It's not good at all, and it's very frustrating
I
because
agree.
there's too many toxic relationships depicted and glorified in media. If it wasn't glorified, that would be fine. But the fact that it's glorified is an issue. And then
Agreed.
Jacob falling in love with a baby is also very
Very
questionable.
problematic. And I hate
Yes.
that they don't really tackle any of the power dynamics stuff. Cause
Mhm.
like I'm dating someone that's only like 7 years younger than me.
Mhm.
Like she's just 20. And I feel terrible. Like even in describing her, I describe it as oh just 20 cuz like I feel the guilt of that power dynamic.
Mhm.
They'd never tackle that with Edward. They never tackle that with Bella. Like, there are just so many red flags, and they never take the time to really address just the absurd power dynamic between them. How easy it would be for him to abuse her, how she has no level of recourse.
Well, he actually does do that. He leaves
Exactly.
her because he doesn't want to hurt her, and it spirals her into this depression. I hate anytime someone's like, I'm sorry, I'm a vampire. I'm too powerful. I can't handle it." I'm just like, this is such a tired trope. I hate this trope.
Same. I did have something like that happen in one of my D&D campaigns
Hmm.
where a person responded like, "Oh yes, I have to leave them because I'm too powerful." Only for the person they're leaving being like, "Okay, the fact that you said that just proves how fucking stupid you are. Do you really think that's gonna help anything? You
Yeah,
lazy idiot. Get back here and help me."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. It's so stupid. I
It
swear to
really
God.
is.
If any of my vampires did that, which they wouldn't, if one of their love interests would tear them a fucking new one.
As they should.
Hmm.
Um, so let me ask you this. Do you prefer vampires that are vampires via like magic and stuff like that? Or vampires that are vampires because of like it changing DNA? I guess do you prefer those that are changed because of biology or those that are changed because of magic?
Definitely a bio vampire.
Yeah?
I'm definitely a living biology vampire person. I love it too much. Whenever I see a living vampire in one of my peers' books, I'm like, yes, let it spread.
Nice. I do love that.
Even though I do have undead vampires in my books, as I said so much, oh, I'm not going to do this, and I was writing and writing and writing, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing a ritual? What do you do? And then of course I get undead vampires because I can't escape it.
Nice. I love
No
it.
control over my writing.
Um I honestly prefer magic vampires, but that's just because I have
Hmm.
this huge love of magic. Like,
That's
even
fair.
in all the games I play, like, I've been trying to play WoW forever. I've
Hmm.
never gotten a rogue or a warrior
Oh,
or,
I
like,
love magic too.
yeah,
Like, if there's a bio vampire, they should also have magic. My vampires have these ridiculous powers that are overpowered as fuck, but it's fun. It's too much fun. I love
right.
magic.
It's like in my 5,000 plus hours of fucking Skyrim, not once have I
Hmm.
ever done a melee only playthrough just because I love magic way too much. Magic is
That's
awesome.
right. That's why I don't play warriors. And if I do play a class that doesn't have magic, like a rogue, they still have magic because I set them up.
Right?
But
It's
warriors,
like,
I can't justify. Warriors, I'm just like, no, nope, you're not interesting. I can't do it.
right? It's like in like even in D&D, there's one so like with the campaign that you and I are going to be doing soon. Um
Hmm.
I made a character for every class and it's like my fucking fighter was just de facto an Eldritch Knight. I never even doubted like which subclass I would go for. It's like nope, it's Eldritch Knight.
Hmm.
And for the rogue, it was of course the fucking trickster.
Arcane Trickster. That's what I
Yeah,
play Ares as in my other campaign. I love it so much. It's so much
I love
fun.
that.
He fucks around so much.
Nice. Um so that's pretty much all on the topic. I can't think of any other questions to ask you. I would love to just hear you complain more about Twilight though. It's really entertaining.
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine as a vampire. And, I'm not going to put down anyone who likes Twilight. That's fine, and you can have your preference. But I just
Right.
personally can't stand it. Like, as a vampire author, getting asked, hey, is your book Twilight? I'm just like, it's the most annoying question and the most, like, infuriating thing
Mhm.
that you get as a vampire author.
Yeah. What is one one vampire, just one from Twilight that you would honestly like to drop into your vampire fiction just to see how they operate in this world of like completely different vampires?
Probably like I said, the actual valuable characters like Rosalind
Mhm.
and her backstory was really cool. The lore is, shaky, but her backstory and character itself was very cool. Um, because I mean, she was abused and then turned into a vampire and butchered her lover.
Mhm.
I think at the wedding. I don't remember what happened, but
Oof.
her story would have been so much more interesting to explore. In the lore aside, it would have been way more interesting. Probably would have done really well as a book.
I think that would be
Okay,
really cool.
yeah.
What is the single worst depiction of vampires you've seen?
Aside from Twilight,
Aside, aside from the gargoyles of Twilight.
um, so this is gonna be controversial, but the like bare bones traditional vampire or Nosferatu, or not Nosferatu, isn't that bad. That's still even better than the bare bones traditional holy like pure, because it has that trope of just pure evil, like with no exceptions.
Hmm.
And I'm not a fan of Christian mythology as it is. So if you inject that into something that I like, then I'm just going to hate it even.
Same.
So anything to do with like the holy waters burning their skin or crosses, etc. And I've read stories where I've liked it, like or not like the lore, but like the vampires and stories. But
Hmm.
do I like the lore itself? No, not really. But I deal with it
Yeah, I
because
got that.
Twilight is a terrible story and terrible lore. So,
Yeah, agreed. I think the vampire origin that I dislike the most is probably from Elder Scrolls, because in Elder Scrolls lore, there's a bunch of different vampire tribes. Basically, like over time, tribes kind of differ over
mm-hmm,
time. I just repeated myself, but yeah, tribes develop different powers, abilities, whatnot. Like some have the ability to reach through ice without breaking it. Others can turn into mist. Like they develop
mm-hmm.
cool abilities over time. But the original OG vampire in original Elder Scrolls lore was a priestess of Meridia, who is a Daedric prince of light and whatnot. She hates the undead and she hates, anything undead. And so she would constantly come into conflict with another Daedric prince, Molag Bal, who loves the undead. He loves all of that. And so, I guess, a way to mock Meridia, he kidnaps her priestess, rapes her, and that kills her. And Meridia, because her priestess is now corrupted, abandons her priestess, and then the priestess becomes a vampire.
Oh
And
yeah, I don't like that lore.
yeah, and in the Elder Scrolls, there's an entire faction of vampires known as the Daughters of Cold Harbor, where basically these are women that go through this ritual. That way they can go to Molag Bal's realm, and he basically tortures them and uses them and does all these terrible, terrible things to break them. And those that survive end up becoming these insanely powerful vampire queens.
Oh yeah, I can't. I don't like
Yeah,
that at all. Ugh, that is.
yeah,
That's got to be. Now that's my least favorite.
right? And like they handle it so weirdly because like in Skyrim there's a character known as Serana who is a companion the player can get that is a daughter of Cold Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
and she just is just kind of like a kind of callous and a little morose spellcasting necromancer. That's it. That's her character trait.
It's kind of brushing off the major issue.
Everything. It brushes off
So,
that. It also brushes off the fact that she went through this with her mom, that her whole
oh
family
my
went through this
gosh,
process. Yeah. It
that's
brushes
handling it
off
horribly.
all of that. Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like even her mom, like you put your kid through this, and yet her and her mom are still depicted as having this at least loving relationship. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Not good. That is
Right? That's so
really
bad.
bad. Not good at all.
Nope. Well, I think this was a very good talk about vampires. I love getting to
I
pick
agree.
your brain about this. It was really fun.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Um, to
It's a lot
any,
of fun.
it really is. To anyone that is watching this on YouTube, I'm going to be including a link to Dessa's Twitter and a link to her Amazon page in the description below, so please look out for that. If you're watching here on Twitch, please go check her out on Twitter and everything. Des, do you want to tell them your Twitter handle?
Oh sure. It's the real disaster, but it's spelled in a different way. DSTR. I'm sorry, I suck at actually. If I don't have something in front of me, I can't.
That's okay.
visualize things in my head. I don't know why. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Um, so my handle is the real and then DES8STR. Wow, I butchered that before. You could tell that my brain doesn't work properly that way. Yeah. So anyway,
That's
but
okay.
Des M Aster. You can just find me by looking that up too. That one's easier.
Des is really cool. I've had her on Topic Tuesday multiple times. I hope to have her on plenty of in the future. I personally endorse her. She is very smart, very compassionate. Her writing is definitely unique, but I've never really read anything quite like how she reads it. And so it does pull you in. I do have to take breaks from it just because it isn't my jam, the kind of vampire fiction she writes. But whenever I pick up one of her books, I just keep reading until something makes me put it down. So please, please, please check out, all of her stuff. Please go to support her. She's great. I personally endorse her.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. Um, to everyone else, you can find me on most social media platforms with Bryn underscore the underscore Valk. Or you can just Google Brynhilder Underwood and check out the first half page of Google, apparently. Um, Apparently I got threads just complaining about me on like a few True Scum and Turf sites. It's awesome. I love it.
Oh, congrats. That's
Right? God,
great.
it's so cool.
It's gotta be a
Um,
really good feeling.
right? Um,
You're getting there. Getting mainstream hate from people. This is awesome.
right? You can support me on my Ko-Fi. You can find a link to that in my Twitch description, as well as in the Brinhalla server if you join that Discord server. Um, that all goes towards supporting me trying to make content creation a full-time thing. You can follow me on YouTube by looking up Brynhilder Underwood, which, of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're already here. Uh, yeah, thank you very much for just watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for all the support. I love you. Please make sure that you eat and drink, okay? Des, you are freaking wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's over you, of course.
Thank you. Peace.